see this as hints and tips and things to think about, and not as your absolute guide as to how to be a brilliant commissioned portrait painter. I think that the discussion afterwards will perhaps be the most interesting bit as you swap experiences and approaches. So I'll try and talk for perhaps 40 minutes, leaving, say, 20 minutes for questions. So, to start out, I work with Mal Galleries, and within that, for the Royal Society of Portrait Painters in particular, because portrait commissions are my specialty. And for those of you who don't know, it has 4 main activities and a permanent collection at Girton College. We have our annual exhibition at Mal Galleries, and many of you exhibit there very successfully, and thank you for your contribution. At that exhibition, we have prizes and awards, and during the exhibition, we offer demonstrations, workshops, and talks, and other engaging activities. And finally, but not least, because this is primary purpose trading, so to speak, the portrait commission service, because that's the magic where you meet primarily the client with the artist to make the art that we so love. My part within this is multifactorial. So I don't just do the consulting, I do the promoting. I try and bring portrait commissions to people's attention and hopefully encourage them to desire and effect a portrait commission. I present members' works to the public, to potential clients, putting together their portfolios and representing them online and in publicity. And I do the same for people who are exhibiting with us. So during the show, we'll have the members section of commissions information, and other exhibitors also put forward work so people can see not just the one-off painting in the exhibition, but a sense of the body of their work and how they go about it with all the information that goes with it. Once we have done the consulting, which is a sort of, as Richard says, counselling exercise, where I help to lead people to the artist that suits them, I do the administration side. So that's all the contracting and invoicing. So hopefully I've got a little bit of experience of the client's perspective on all these different aspects. So there's no point in being ready to accept a commission if nobody can find you. So I thought we'd start out with how to get yourself seen, a very tiny pocket version of things you might think about doing. The first section I'm looking at is options where the choices have been selected by somebody or a group of people. And this one's the hot one, recommendation, because that's free, and it's very quick and very personal, and not to be underestimated. So when somebody's seen your work and enthused about it, they're free advertising. When you've painted a portrait commission that they love, they will tell their friends about it. So don't underestimate personal recommendation. Very often that will go not straight to a commission to you, following up the phone number. They will go via your website to check you out. So it's not quite a straight path. There's the one-man show, which for portraiture is an interesting one because it's jammed tomorrow. It's not like a normal selling exhibition if you're using commissioned works to show your abilities. And so that carries with it more complications and risks than if you were doing, say, landscape painting, which just walks off the wall. There's the agent option. A few portrait painters will get taken up by agents, such as fine art commissions or Philip Mould, or other galleries that do your work in general and will promote your portraits. But generally speaking, commissioned portraits are not popular with agents. It's much easier to do sold work. And finally, the one I skipped, is the open exhibition, which I think is a very good entree into the public realm. If you look at the exhibition that we have, you'll see people going around with their mobile phones, capturing you, so they can come back to you when they're ready. So we have the sales. We have a surprising number of sales for an exhibition that's not founded on selling. We sell about £25,000, I think it is, yes, worth of portraits this year. So of the few works that are for sale, we do sell a lot, there's prizes and awards, over £22,000, and peer recognition, which I know is very important to artists. It's, on the whole, quite a lonely existence. And I think it's really affirming when people you rate you. And then finally, the commissions. Not everybody who exhibits gets commissions, but there are a lot of people who would like to commission who come to the exhibition. So it's a good way of bringing your work to the public for that purpose. Thought it'd be interesting, a few statistics. The submissions that we get are very similar to the BP Portrait Award ones, just a little bit lower, but we take twice as many works. Last year, we took 52 face-to-face inquiries, but many more go online and come through the website. We had 5,000 visitors, and I've covered the prize money. So I think there's a lot to be had through the open exhibition route as a way of bringing yourself to people. For those who are not familiar with these world, these are a few of the opportunities for portrait specialists. So we have our show, the Ruth Borchardt self-portrait, so it's very much portraits, but not so commissionable. The BP Portrait Award, which is an obvious one, and then less obvious, many of our open shows take and like portraits which sell and which get commission inquiries. We just had the Royal Institute of Oil Painters, and that brought in commission inquiries. And the Pastel Society in particular, it takes all drawn media, that also gathers commission inquiries as well as sales. Something that has come out of fashion in a way, I think everyone's so quick online, they can neglect the local press. And portraiture is a bit of a lovely one for this because it's all about stories, it's all about people. And so if you can find a hook, tell your story, because an article really does bring you to people's attention. I was talking earlier about how people at the exhibition were clicking and taking your information ready for later. And where they go later is the website. So when you're thinking about presenting yourself, the key is a website. Everything else drives to it. Things are changing, they're not fixed. Facebook has been used as a platform, but as a platform it is waning. It's Instagram that's growing. Instagram can be used for transactions. Artists like Emma Hopkins do very successful work with Instagram with millions of followers and sales. But generally speaking, it's more to get people familiar with your work and interested, and people will migrate to your website before making contact for a commission. Pinterest gets a lot of interest, but analysing the people on it for the Royal Society of Portrait Painters, the people we're attracting are teachers primarily. It's very good for interior design, so I can see that we could do better on that front. But right now, Pinterest is working more for research than for people wanting to actually commission something. And king here for us is search engine optimization. If anyone's Googling slightly wrong, it enables them to find you. So it's a question of having the key phrases written through your website, which is portrait, painting, painter, your name, and anything else special that you want to tell people about what you do. And that threads not only through the text of your website, but on the alt tags, the bits that you put in for people who can't see the image, the descriptors, because that's another chance to put in your keywords, and it helps with the search engines. They actually read these things. Yes. So how do people look at your website when they want to commission a work of art? It's very much picture-led. What they want to see is images of your work. They like to see a group of images to get a sense of your body of work, and then to be able to focus in on the individual work. They don't like lots of fancy stuff before you get there, lots of gateways and moving images and other distracting stuff. They want to go straight to examples of your work. They like reassurance. That's what the biography does in this case. It tells the person looking at your website that other people think you're okay, that you've exhibited, you've got interesting commissions, you've won a prize. So when you're writing your biography, it's not just all about your the way you work, the way you think, your practice, so to speak. You have to subliminally give the messages of reassurance. Then there's the basic commissions information about how you work. So they feel safe that when they contact you, they won't be left floundering. So what happens next? You make an inquiry, and you might discuss the work. They might want to know how many sittings. It's a frequent question. How long they are, where they are, because some artists will travel to the sitter, and others prefer the safe conditions of the studio, the good lighting, the known quantities. So these sort of things are as well to put up front, so they know what you'll like to deal with. In terms of managing expectations, how the money works is a question. Do you take a deposit? When do you become committed? If I ring you up, will I be committed immediately? You would give your client a sense that they can talk to you softly without becoming committed, that they can explore, and it's only when they book a sitting that they become committed to this. A lot of artists will have a works for sale section, where I'd say be very careful if you're exhibiting, not to double sell it, to take it off. It's quite easy to run into problems if you forget you've got to work on your website and then you put it in a gallery. The other thing that's key is the image and it's the contact. So you want people to see your work, like it, and make contact. And as an addition, collect the email addresses, because then when you do something interesting or you have a show, you can tell people. We use Campaign Monitor and MailChimp to do that. You link it to your website, people can sign up, and then you've collected all the people who've liked your work for when you've got something useful to say. When you're selecting images for your website or for other presentation, you will probably be thinking about how good the portrait is, how well painted, how well drawn, how the minimal marks and things like this. Your client will be looking for one of these. So if they see a drawing, they won't know that you paint. If they see somebody in uniform, they will think you don't do casual around the kitchen. If you do male, they think you don't do female. And if you do old, they think you don't do young. So they will be thinking, I want one of those. They look at it very differently. And for an artist, that can be, you go to this effort to create this wonderful work of art with tremendous integrity, and they'll be picking it up subliminally. But their main question is it what I want? Is it one of those that I'm going to get? Images. I deal with a lot of images, so I have quite a lot to say about images. First of all, quality matters. It's not just the resolution, which has to be right. It doesn't mean big. So on a website, you don't really want more than 72 by 600 pixels or thereabouts. But for print, you need something much higher. It's also about the image itself. If the color balance is out, then it's out and it's not going to look right. If it's slightly out of focus, it's not going to represent you well. So it is worth putting a lot of effort into getting good images by whatever means you can. If you've got good images, make sure that anybody representing you gets to see them. Because when I'm showing people your work, I will show them what I've got. I can't show them what I haven't got. So keep people up to date with what's there. Keep your website up to date. My sister, hope she won't mind this, missed an opportunity because Mall Galleries had a space at the last minute. She had work that was exhibition ready, that would have been perfect. But when I took my colleagues to her website, it was so out of date. The work that they saw was irrelevant. And so you don't know, she didn't know about this till I told her. You don't know what opportunities you're missing by not keeping your website up to date. And how you treat your images. If your images are not titled properly, they're very easy to lose. They're easy to lose on the internet, because if people are searching by title, they're not going to show. They're easy to lose in your own filing system, and they're easy to lose when you send them out to people like me. So once you get an image you're happy with, please, name and title. Medium and size are a good addition too, but name and title are an absolute must. I get a lot of very badly titled images. Something you may or may not be aware of is copyright. A commissioned work of art is your copyright. So your client might have paid for it, your client might have sat for it, but the copyright belongs to you. It doesn't mean that it's sensible always to keep all of it, because sitters can be very private, very sensitive about it. And so it's a conversation to be had as to what rights everybody's going to use. Are they happy for you to put that image out and about? And do they want to use it for, say, Christmas cards? Because that's your right, and you can grant a license for them to do that, or anything else they want to do, and you have the right to charge a fee for that. You also have the right to have your name and title properly on the image wherever it appears. So just be aware that copyright is yours, and you need to look after it. Oh, and I should say, you're not the only person involved. If you've got a professional photographer to take the image, the natural way, the default position is that the copyright belongs to the photographer. So you need to negotiate that up front. You also need to acknowledge the photographer when you're reproducing as appropriate. So we go to, you've got a work out there. How does the client think about it when they're choosing you? We've covered how they look at your image rather differently in a I want one of those way. Oh, I've missed a slide. Now we're looking at how do they compare artists? How do they think about the different artists? With the Royal Society of Portrait Painters, we have artist boards, and we do that deliberately because clients find it very hard to distinguish between the sitter and the commission, the nature of the commission, and the element of a portrait that actually belongs to the artist. When you present lots of works at once, you start to get a sense of what belongs to the artist. It stops matching quite so much about the pose, the age, the background, the content, and all the peripheral things in a portrait. And they start to get a sense of the you-ness of you. And they will do this quite quickly. Looking at, we know John Walton's work. I think everyone knows each one of those would have taken many painstaking hours to produce. But somebody looking at it will know whether it speaks to them or not in a matter of seconds, minutes, no time at all. So that's the rate at which you're reaching people. And when I'm working with people, I get them to look through all the boards and instinctively, quickly and heart-led, not intellectually head-led and slowly, to pull aside anything they're attracted to make a short list. And that short list is then whittled down on a thought-through head basis. So it's a very instinctive partnership. Commissions are very personal. It's me to you. And I think that's how so many amazing relationships seem to be formed through the commissioned portrait. I want one of those. So mistakes you can make when presenting your work is produce one of those that you don't want to do anymore. So I thought I'd tell the story of lovely Harry here. Jeff Hazer produced a chanting portrait of a young boy, which we actually use quite a lot for publicity. But it started to work against him because he got really fed up with getting portrait commissions of children. So we had to slightly hide Harry and put adults forward to try and draw a different audience. The other way it can go wrong is if your style is fluid and changing over time, and people look at your website or look at your body of work and say, I want one of those, and actually you're not doing one of those anymore, that can lead to confusion. So just be careful to manage expectations as to what you're doing now. So the clients have looked around the internet, they've looked around the exhibition, they've looked around your website, and they've chosen you. And they're going to ask, well, can I afford it? How much does it cost? And from your point of view, how do you get to a pricing point? It's not easy. And I see over a career, this is a progression. When you're starting out, because personal recommendation matters, because you need to build a portfolio of work, I think you price to sell. You just need to get the work out there. And then you start to get the commissions in, and you're serious about this, and you need to price to make a living. And that goes well, and you start to have to manage waiting lists. And when you feel the commissions coming in, that's a good time to just edge your prices up. So that's a measure of size of price, stage of career, and really the aims of what you're trying to do with your pricing. Different artists have different techniques, and different techniques take different amounts of time to produce. So looking at these three, the number of hours that have gone into them are very different. Tom Coates will have done this watercolour in a matter of hours. But Keith Breeden will use 26 layers of glazes typically for his oil paintings. And so it will take him much more time. Or somebody like Robin Lee Hall working in egg tempera with those minute brush strokes. And so part of pricing, particularly at the early stages, has to be how many hours does it take? And can I afford to do this? Pricing isn't a science, it is an art form. And you kind of put a lot of ingredients into the mix, shake it up, try something, see if it feels right. That's internally, until you feel comfortable. Because once you've published a price, it's out there and it's hard to retract from it. It's much easier to go up than it is to come down publicly. Retreating on prices doesn't look so good. So as I mentioned before, creating a portfolio and marketing would be downward pressure. Pounds per hour is upwards. Market price, what's everyone else charging? Have you sold before? What's your benchmark? Who are you selling to? Because if you're selling to people without a lot of expendable money, then you can't charge more than they can pay. But if you attract a very wealthy clientele, then there's a bit more room there. Pressure of work. As soon as you feel the pressure of work, well, maybe it's time to go up a bit. Other things to bear in mind, if you're working with an agent, you need to make allowance for commission. And professional artists like to keep a level price across all the platforms. VAT registration, that is an awful bore. It's not just expensive, it's very time consuming to administer. But if you hit that, you need to price that in. Our artists usually price it on top, so it's X plus VAT. But if you get near VAT, you do need to be clear about what's going on. And expenses. You can't really include expenses in a portrait in that you don't know what they're going to be. Sometimes the frame is part of the work, so it does get included. But if it's something that the client has a part in or adds on, they might want a very elaborate hand-carved, hand-gilded frame at thousands of pounds, or they might want a simple wooden frame for much less. So that is a separate and additional item. Same with any travel or accommodation. So expenses, keep them separate, just keep the knowables within your fee structure, and then be clear about it with the client. So the client has come to you. They know roughly what you're about, what are going to be the questions they're going to ask next when they're getting quite close to commissioning. They do need to know what you're going to charge. They need to feel safe with the decisions they're making. So if they suddenly decide to add a cat, a dog, a house, or something complex, they need to know how much or whether you're going to add to your pricing for that. And they don't want to embarrass themselves by diving into something they can't afford. So you do need to give information so people feel safe. I think we've gone through a bit of things that are not included. Extra things, extra people. Some artists feel that extra people are actually quite helpful because you have a lot of figures in a space, you pay less attention to the head and it becomes more of a conversation piece and they like them. So they don't add much per extra person. Other artists think, well, that's 2 portraits and a portrait of a relationship between 2 people. And if any of those things goes wrong, well, I've got to start again. And so the amount extra per extra figure goes up. So the difference is between 10% and 75% extra would be rules of thumb. But as you know, as artists, there are no rules for artists. Everyone's different. Payment stages. Very often, an artist will take a commission, and that keeps the relationship safe. You know the client is serious about completing the journey, and it helps with the cash flow, and it looks professional. But for a lot of artists, this doesn't work out. They much prefer a more fluid, more personal relationship, and you either take it or leave it on completion. And those decisions are very personal to the artist as to how you work on this front. Always have a quote. It's so important to manage expectations. So once you've agreed with your client what the parameters are, what you're going to do, it's good to get this in writing with what you're going to do and how much it's going to cost so that everybody knows what's going to happen and there are no misplaced expectations. Clients are always interested in timing. It doesn't mean that it's make or break. They often will put a completion date up front really early. But if you think you're going to take 6 months, it's probably wise to say 7 in case you're ill or go on holiday or something else jumps in, so the client doesn't feel that they're unimportant and slipping in the queue. The other interesting one is how much do they get involved? Because if you're not experienced with commissions, you may not know how it feels to have somebody feeding back to you about something that they are a co-participant in. Some artists actually won't let their clients see their portrait till it's finished, partly because it's not finished and therefore any comment's not relevant, but often because they get so concerned about pleasing the client that it throws the whole portrait off. So that's a personal thing to think about, how much you're going to let the client be involved along the journey. Too much client involvement over the journey, I feel, can be very complicated and can make for a bit of a camel. It doesn't mean you don't collaborate. It's important to be engaged all the way, but it's something that you need to be aware that you're managing. And then the sign-off, particularly if you're dealing with an institute, signing off with an individual is easy. Very often it's sending over a JPEG for approval. And then if everybody's happy, which they usually are, it's the bill, and then you deliver the work. But if you're dealing with an institution, it's not always very clear whose sign-off it is. Is it the sitter? Is it the person organising the commission? Is it a committee? Or is it the head of the organisation? So it's as well to identify that quite early on and what the procedures are for getting the work approved. Yes, you may not think of yourselves as experts, but 9 times out of 10, the person sitting for you or the person commissioning the work won't have commissioned a portrait before. So you are the expert, and it's your job to make them feel safe. You need to manage their expectations along the way and stay one step ahead all the time so they know what's happening next. And that's not just on a mechanical level. It's on an emotional level too. I had a problem with a portrait once where there was a failure of communication and the sitter felt that the artist didn't want to draw them. And this wasn't the case. What was happening really was the artist had their own personal problems, which meant he wasn't in communication and wasn't responding to calls. And an email to say, forgive me if I go quiet for a while, I've got things to deal with, I'll come back to you, would have stopped all that happening. So manage expectations when things go wrong, particularly. If you need to start again, or a sitting has to be cancelled, or if you're going to be late, just manage it ahead of time so the client feels respected and safe. Agreement in writing, I think we've covered, that's really important, and that's what you go back to make sure things are clear. Portraits are a very personal thing. They're not usually very contractual. I very rarely draw up a full contract. So for American lawyers or actually British solicitors, yeah, I do a few contracts, but it's usually for business. For personal commissions, so much of it is about relationship and trust. You just draw out the broad parameters of what's expected: size, medium, content, timings, all the things that are important to the client. Be organised, punctual and polite, as I'm sure you all are. But turning up on time and that sort of thing. Not turning up on time can show disrespect rather than disorganisation. So that needs to be ameliorated if it goes wrong. I just thought I'd talk about an actual commission. This one's just been finished. It came about through the death of a father. It rather brought David up short. It made him realise how important families are, and it made him aware of his own mortality. And a portrait is something that's a weapon against ephemerality, against mortality. It throws love into the future. It's a legacy for future generations. So he thought that a portrait commission would be a good way to spend his inheritance. This is an interesting family, not a typical one really. They're a gay couple with 2 adopted sons. So bonding the family and making them feel part of a legacy was particularly important to this commission motivation. They wanted a large picture of the family looking relaxed, football kit, sofas, not a formal sit-up traditional portrait. So they started by looking online, and they found Simon Davis. Simon's practice is to take photographs. So he went up and saw them and spent a day with them, taking photographs as he went, observing quietly while he wasn't photographing. He talked about the composition, the location, and they worked on that together. And then he showed them his photographic compositions for approval. And they worked on those until they got one they were all happy with. He then built the painting up from a drawing, taking on the key pieces. If you note how they're all intertwined, the knees touch, the hands touch, the whole family is bound together. This was done in a matter of months after a delay for various personal reasons. And it's something that the family treasure. It has brought them a sense of lasting family and an object that they really enjoy. And I think Simon's caught them looking really relaxed. I love the way that they are intertwined and the busyness of the background. So yes, happy. It's amazing how many people are profoundly moved by their portraits. I don't think you as creators realise how much they mean to the sitters. Very often, somebody will burst into tears on seeing a portrait for the first time. So, I thought I'd bring this up. I love this. He's a great character and really enjoyed the whole thing with June Mendoza. But this side actually in a way to say, don't panic if a sitter is a little bit taken aback when they first see their portrait or they see a portrait of somebody they love, because We're used to seeing ourselves in the mirror. That's the wrong way round. We see ourselves in photography. That's a snap of a moment. We have never seen ourselves having gone through the imagination of an artist. And for a moment, everything that's different to that can seem not right to the sitter. We're very funny about our own images. I think we all have a little bit of dysmorphia. Sometimes I look in a mirror and I think I look really great, and other times I think I look very sad and decrepit. And actually, the level of great that I think I am and the level of decrepit I think I am, I hope, are not quite true, either of them. And all these overlays go onto the first view of a portrait. So don't panic if they're not saying, yeah, great, like this. It can happen that people are getting used to it and learning. That doesn't mean it's not a good idea to listen and to engage with the sitter. If they think there's something wrong about this or that, it doesn't mean you write them off, because they do know themselves, they do know the people they love. But equally, you are the artist, you are the creator, and you are the one that knows that this is a successful portrait, and very often the sitter will learn over a bit of time. So, yes, listen, yes, adapt if necessary, but don't feel necessarily, because the client's not settled, that it's wrong. It takes time. So allowing the person to live with their portrait for a bit and learn to see themselves differently and to enjoy it for what it is and not for what they think it might be or should have been is a good thing. Having said which, when I started my career all 30-something years ago, I thought it would be fraught with difficulties. I thought it's so sensitive, it's so personal, it's bound to go wrong. People are bound to get very stressed about this. Actually, I've had years and years of very happy outcomes, and I'm quite pushed to think of examples of things that haven't worked. So be assured that you can have confidence that portraiture brings happiness. Hopefully, it shows love and is a legacy of an object of beauty as well as sentiment to cast into the future. So, the secret it's communication. It's communicating what you can do, it's communicating what you are doing, and communicating what you're going to do. And that's two-way. It's both listening and speaking. And I think if you manage your communications carefully, it's very easy to be a good commissioned artist. So, yeah. So I'm hoping that you guys are going to come up with some really interesting questions, because my theory is that you practitioners have got all the interesting nuances, answers, insecurities. Anyone brave enough to think of something?
Well, I like your communicators. It's like a book report. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you've told them.
Yeah, and then they feel safe. Yes, because they're on your side. They want it to work. You're a team, and there's no need to be afraid and hide things. If you're an artist working from life, 6 to 10 sittings of an hour and a half to 2 hours is kind of what it is. Everybody has exceptions. Michael Reynolds can do one he used to be able to do one very, very quickly. And some artists take a lot longer. Keith Breeden can do 14, 16, 20 sittings if you let him. However, a lot of artists use photography as well, and that can make the number of sittings and the length of sittings much shorter. So Simon Davis can work with 1 or 2 sittings, and he was the one you just saw. So it's very personal, and again, it's managing expectations. So the sitter doesn't feel, if you're using photography, that you haven't paid them much attention, because a lot of that attention comes off-site, so to speak, or that you're taking too much of their time if you had face-to-face sittings. So as long as you manage expectations, ask for slightly more than you need and explain that part of it's contingency. And that way you'll keep everybody safe and happy. That's a very good one.
Or do they realistic or
I think some people see the world through more rose-coloured tinted glasses than others. And there are some artists where I do say to people, this is a sort of warts and all painter, you get a reality, it's more gritty. And you get others which have a sunnier aspect and listen more carefully to people's desire to be portrayed in a very positive light. And it's all part of the brief. I mean, you can have at a wonderful academic institution, they were new onto the scene, a relatively new university, serious about art, serious about their future. And part of the brief was really to put a marker down for we mean business about art and about the future. And so they wanted not an intimate, quiet, introvert portrait, but a heroic, outward-going portrait, which is what they got. It was terrific. So it's part of the choice of artists, part of the brief, as to which way it goes. People tend to choose the artist that suits the level of kindness and flattery. The copyright, you need to be careful with this because the copyright resides with the photographer and you must get permission. It's very dangerous not to, it can be very expensive. There have been all sorts of court cases. There's one where a newspaper cutting of an artist, of a photograph, was converted from that into I think it was a carpet, a different medium, and they still got done for stealing the copyright because it was still attached to that image. So it is something to be aware of. Make sure your photographs are clean copyright-wise. What tends to happen is if somebody wants a child with a smile, they want one of those. So choose an artist who produces a child with a smile in their portfolio. And that's how that one is usually solved. If you're painting from life, it's very hard to have a smile. It usually goes into rictus. And if it's a child, it's just not going to do it.
But do you think more with someone's mother or father, you know, they're probably imagining them, you know, do we all sort of imagine that?
I think every parent is different. And if you think about it, your children aren't smiling all the time, are they? So you know your child in many guises.
I'm not talking about child portraits.
Oh, I see.
More the mother, if you're doing the mother or the father, older people.
Pete, I think one of the most common comments on portraits is they do make you look serious.
Yeah, that's the thing, yeah.
Yes, because it's over many moments and you can't hold that animation.
Does that tend to be an issue? Do people come back at you with, oh, they look too miserable or anything like that?
I can think of one. I suspect that there's a level of comment which I don't hear. People are very polite to me. And so there's an element of negotiation there.
Yeah, so it would just be the artist that is about that, I suppose.
And it is about choosing the artist and managing expectations.
Yeah.
Just talking to them about what they expect. And I think that's very individual because it can affect you in different ways. You can either get grumpy because it's not relevant because I haven't finished and that's not where it's going, or it can be, as I said, it can throw you off course. If you care that you want to make them so happy, you might move your image in a direction to suit them, and that moves it off your original concept. You end up with an awkward combination. And so whilst you want to take what they say into consideration and balance it, you need to hold your integrity. And I think that's your personality as to whether you will be swayed too much or not by their comments as you go through the thing. Does anyone have experience of clients commenting through the work?
Well,
Sorry, no, you were nodding. Yeah. And how does it feel for you?
No, well, I found it reassuring, but I was
Yeah.
very cautious at first.
Yeah, but that's good.
Yeah, but
So it was helpful.
yeah, helpful.
Yeah.
Well, helpful, but I didn't listen to it.
But that probably shows that you have the confidence to allow that.
Feel comfortable, so
Yes,
that's what
yes.
I wanted to do.
Well, that's a safe position. But if you thought, oh, I must change it,
Yeah,
then that might have pushed you off course.
yeah.
Yeah.
What if they don't like it?
I avoid showing portrait until it's finished because with family members, not with people I don't know, but with family members I have actually shown them portrait as it's progressed. And I think the problem has been that they think that what they see, sort of in progress, is the way it's going to look
when it's finished.
when it's finished.
Yes.
You don't really relate to the fact that things can actually change
Yes,
as
as it goes along.
So people I don't know, I never show them. And then, to be honest, they've never asked me to show them.
I remember watching a portrait of being done of myself, and that was fascinating because I would do it in my lunch break and I'd put on my professional pretty face and I'd do all the things, and he would paint my mood underneath every time. So it really was a combination of many moments, and that was fascinating.
I think showing the work early on in the piece, just from a compositional point of view.
Composition's important, actually. I did miss that out. It always show a compositional sketch, photograph, idea before going underway. So you don't want a fundamental misunderstanding at that level. I think that's very wise, yes. It's difficult because every artist and every situation is different. And one of the things I've found is now that everybody's online, everyone's prices are coming into the same sort of band. Yes, it is. It's really quite remarkable. I find that very difficult because what I do with pricing is do that funny, I put all these ideas into a pot and I stir them round and I see what comes out rather than look at a general picture. Because it really doesn't matter if somebody's charging £100,000 over here or £200 over there. It's the price that works for where you're at that's relevant. So that's not much help, sorry. You could have a look at the Royal Society of Portrait Painters website, but they're all people who've been elected to membership and are at a certain stage in their career, so it's not really a fair look at the total market. Because their prices are up there mostly. That's exactly what John Walton does. He has a price which is so much to start the idea, and then so much per square centimetre, and then so much extra per extra figure. So it's all very mathematical, but that's very unusual. Because what tends to happen is as your works get bigger, you have more clear space that doesn't need as much work, but you have more canvas size. So the price goes up, but not as far up. Exactly, because the way you work a head and shoulders is a lot more time per square centimetre, generally speaking, than you would for a full length. So it's a balancing act. But then there's also the thing that to be able to reach the broad market, people who can't afford a full length, maybe you just be a little bit gentle on the small head and a little bit more severe on the big full length. It's not a science. All sorts of people. It's a surprisingly broad range of people. Yes, there is a group of people for whom it's part of their lineage, who have, each generation is portrayed, but they're in the minority. It really is open to anybody. I think you need a certain amount of disposable income because it's not cheap to commission a portrait, but there are people who will save and do a grandchild when it reaches the age of 10, or each one coming along and saving accordingly, and have a drawing. It's hard to, I'm trying to think, where do we advertise? Country Life readers are good. That's, so a little, look at the statistics. The people who commission portraits are not fine art aficionados. They're cultured and cultivated, but they're not fine art professionals on the whole. They're people who enjoy art rather than know about art. It's very hard to generalise. Everyone's a different one. It's one of the problems. Every artist is different and every client is different. Yes, you are owed. Yes, it is your copyright. And yes, they should have paid you. In terms of pursuing it down the courts, the amount of money you're likely to get is not proportional to the amount of the cost you'll get, but that doesn't mean you don't pursue it. It's yours. Yes, I started in the 1980s with offcuts, not offcuts, what do you call it when you frame a watercolour? Yes, huge bits of mount. And I made these boards on mount to display the photographs of artists, because if you're burying around in a box, you can only see one photograph at a time, and you can't get a sense of what an artist is like. And then when you want to look at the next artist, you've got a big mess of photographs and they all get muddled up. So it made sense to put them on the board. And since then, people said, well, that's a bit old-fashioned. Why don't you use a computer? And the answer is because it doesn't work as well. The physicality of the boards really helps people.
Do you update them often?
Not often enough. Why is that? It's because it's hard work getting stuff out of artists. Yes, like the website, the boards need to be up to date because that's what speaks to the client. And the ones I have at the moment are two-sided. One side is older and the other is newer. And it's really interesting to look at the change in style over time. So you'll see changes in palette or changes happen. So yes, they need to be kept updated, and note to artists, please update. We have done actually, yes. For a number of years we had at least one dog a year. It's not, I don't know whether they would do it now or not, they haven't for a couple of years. But yes, we've had several dogs in the show.
Is there an issue with painting and charging friends? You know,
Mates rates.
Mates rates.
No, mates rates are off record. You can do what you like.
Okay.
Yeah, they're your mates. But you don't want them to publish that to their friends who are not your mates, because they will undermine your market level. Oh golly, I'm not good at resale rights. Yes, if it's resold at auction at a
There's a tax, isn't there? I think there's a tax of like 3%.
it's a resale value in that the artists themselves get, if it's sold, I think at auction, is this right? At a higher level, you get a percentage of the amount more than you received in the first place. But please don't trust me on that.
Is that up to the auction rooms to pay?
I think they do oversee that, yes. But actually what tends to happen, it's very rare for artists, living artists, to actually increase in price at auction. It's usually rather depressing. While you're still around, your work tends to be rather low in value at auction, and people only really value after you've gone, which is not much help. Of course there are exceptions, huge exceptions, but the rule is generally auctions aren't good news. Oh, thank you very much.